What up, y'all? The Knight of Greed here with a living, breathing, bona fide tier list for the cost efficiency or rating divided by initial cost of each dinosaur species in Jurassic World evolution. A few disclaimers. This list uses the default 100% genomes of all dinosaurs, it doesn't take into account paleobotany, and it does not take into consideration any cost-efficient gene modifications you could slap on. The list does not particularly matter in any other mode outside of challenge mode realistically, so this is only for those who are up to that particular set of difficulties. If you question whether or not you want to do challenge modes for the skins, I will leave a link below to my showcase of all the challenge mode skins and my 2 guides on how to get through them under part time. While I may not necessarily be the fastest person to complete the challenge modes, I can consistently complete each island on Jurassic in about 7 to 8 hours easily. Anyway, back to the tier list. Just ignore how the S looks, as I ran out of building space on the corner over there to make it look good, but just admire how clean the tier blocks themselves look, because this part took the longest to build, unfortunately. But this is not the first attempt at making this tier list, and I had to redo it because it was originally disorganized and the information that I pulled from online had errors and were not up to date, so I had to essentially go through all the calculations by myself and had to fact check them in the game to make sure that they were accurate. But unless the game is changed or modified or patched, this should be the most up-to-date ranking for the different cost efficiency of the dinosaurs, and you better believe if more dinosaurs are released, I will remake this entire list. But I wouldn't do it from scratch. I mean, I put a little extra space, as you can see at the bottom of E tier, so if more dinosaurs are added, then I can just start moving around some more dinosaurs just in case. And believe me, I think more dinosaurs need to be on E tier considering how bad some of them are. We'll go see. But anyway, I'm getting off track again. But for this tier list, while the dinosaurs are organized objectively from the most cost efficient to least cost efficient, I did add a little flair to each of the different cages to sort of represent a brief overview on my personal opinions on each dinosaurs. If you want to hear a more in-depth explanation, I'll leave timestamps in the bottom so you can see where I talk about each individual dinosaur and their specifics. But yeah, so that's just this tier list overall. So here are my opinions on each of the dinosaurs residing on this list. Very spammable early game in order to get the first star. They are very cheap and supremely cost effective. Very low on social and habitat needs, and can even ride solo or in massive groups. However, they do die of old age often. You may or may not want to replenish your herds of them when they do die off, but the rating is so low that it doesn't really make too much of a difference when they die mid or late game. Nothing wrong with keeping one or a handful of these for the sake of maintaining the unique species quota though. Just make sure that your herds are away from dinosaurs that like low populations. You don't want to upset those dinosaurs in the events of escapes or tornadoes, so just be wary of that. Basically, these are slightly less cost-effective but higher cost rating Struthi, but functionally they are very similar overall. By the time you unlock these, you can just use these as cage fillers or just add a handful of them to the Struthi herd to meet the unique species number. This is an absolute rating monster in challenge mode. They can ride solo, they can be in all large groups, and they can just be cage fillers for just about anything like large carnivores and sauropods. They can be a bit temperamental in storms, and if you have them in large numbers, they can be a pain to wrangle back if they escape, but if you have pretty good fencing, like mid-tier fencing, or if you genetically modify to make them calmer, then you should be good with them. They are even more cost efficient if you had certain rating efficiency boosts like Aggressive Instincts 1, and these little guys realistically can account for a large portion of your dinosaur rating towards the end game if you decide to invest to mass produce them. This is a superb starting dinosaur to research immediately. Pretty high rating for a dinosaur you are given, and this can definitely help reduce the unique species penalties early game. They can be kept in small to medium-sized herd and fit well with Pachys and Styggies. Always keep at least a handful of them, if not a little bit more, the whole game. And for me, I have a soft spot for them, as in JPOG there was the Homalocephalae, which was the resident cute dinosaur of your parks, and the Draco here kind of serves as a worthy substitute for me in this game. This is functionally comparable to Dilos in use and effectiveness. They're a bit needier socially, but they can fit in slightly larger populations. While you can unlock them early, they aren't easily usable and require heavy investment, more so mid and late game, because that's when you would want to build them. But they're even more difficult to wrangle back from Dilos, since they can you can fit larger numbers of them once they escape. But I mean, if you do want to invest in a small carnivore that's not Dilo, these are a decent dinosaur to go for. This is an extremely useful early game dino. They are good for spamming out in large herds in general, and they especially benefit from paleobotany. So when it comes to paleobotany, in my personal opinion, investing in the hadrosaurs, iguanodons, and sauropods is the most you get the most bang for your buck if you invest in these three categories, and they have a lot of overlaps in food, so I'm going to be a bit biased to these three groups. But yeah, for this guy, they're definitely a solid addition to all of my parks, and they're pretty compatible with a lot of things, especially other hadrosaurs and the iguanodons. So this guy functions pretty similarly to Oloros, but they're slightly more restrictive in max populations. You can either mass produce them, or you can use them, for padding on the unique species side. Either way, they're excellent and valuable members to any parks that I have. So while you get these guys a little bit later in the game, they are very useful, and they have a good fit with my park when I have Dracorexes and Styggies. They're not terribly good for spamming, but they're a nice dinosaur to have in small groups, or for the unique species requirements, since they're pretty much one of the more cost-efficient animals in the game. But be warned though, by the time you get these dinosaurs up and running, you're probably about to start the in-game and might want to invest in other more spammable dinosaurs. This guy right here. This is a highly precious and prized ceratopsid in challenge mode. While you do unlock it at the 3rd star, which is a bit later in the game, it's a very solid animal that fits well in small groups or with other of its relatives. It's a top tier dinosaur overall. I always have at least a handful of them, and they're not like the most spammable dinosaurs, but you can spam them out more than the rest of its more expensive cousins, if you ask me. So this is a versatile Ankylosaurus. It can be spammed in small and medium-sized herds. Works very well, particularly with Ankies and Crichtons, but they don't really work too well with the more exotic solitary Ankylosaurus, because essentially they'll either make them mad, or these guys won't live up to their full potential when you pair them with those guys. But it can work with non-relative herbivores, because their population size are pretty massive compared to Ankylosaurus, which is really rare for that type of group of dinosaurs. But also, unlike the other Ankylosaurs, it requires at least one other partner for it to be happier, and it's also a bit more needy on the environmental requirements. But realistically, this is just a small price to pay for a top tier, superb, cost-efficient dinosaur that I really always place at least a decent amount in my parks. So now we're on to these guys, the Velociraptors. These are the animals that know their quality, but they do everything in their power to hide it. They are definitely one of the most cost-efficient animals in the entire game, but I feel they're held back by the fact that they're so temperamental that they give even the large carnivores a run for their money, and they can do just as much, if not more, damage if they break out. But if you can keep them in check with high security fences, these guys would be a booming asset to a parks. While I don't personally use them a lot, I am fully aware that if you want to run these guys, they can really do help boost the ratings. And if you don't like to run those large carnivores or anything to be risky, I mean, these are definitely something you'll add to that. So yeah, I'll acknowledge they're good. I mean, I don't pretend they aren't, but I would be lying if I said that, I would want or like to use them, because I don't know, I don't like to use too finicky of carnivores. So this guy is pretty much slightly less cost effective, but it's also less demanding Euplo. It's not really spammable at all, but it's kind of like a bridge because it can either live comfortably alongside like the more social Euplo and Anklo, but they can also live with the more solitary Ankylosaurus. And it's a pretty good cost-efficient filler dinosaur if you want to put it inside either one of these groups. This guy is a very cost-effective sauropod. It's versatile as it can live by itself, and it can also live in medium-sized herd of its kind or in large-sized groups of dinosaurs in general. It meshes well with other sauropods or any other dinosaurs realistically outside of the dreaded Indominus. It's relatively easy to manage compared to its comrades, but if you fit them in with other comrades with other sauropods, do know that you have to cater to the needs of the ones that require more. So it doesn't really matter too much that this guy has such low environmental needs. It's definitely a great candidate to invest in with paleobotany, and it's one of the more spammable sauropods in the end game. So, I mean, I can't stress enough, paleobotany on sauropods it's astronomically high. Like, they make large carnivores a complete joke when you have these up and running for them. So this is another cost-effective sauropod, and it compared to like other later large herbivores, they really don't have a terribly high cage requirements. But unlike the Diplo, it's not as versatile and prefers to be in smaller groups of dinosaurs. But it's an absolute monster in terms of ratings. As with paleobotany, their rating score is in the territory of like the massive large carnivores, giving like some of those big boys with 200 plus ratings a run for their money. And since it's unlocked so early, you can complete the genome before you actually start to need them in your park. It's nice to have a handful of them in one or more enclosures, and by endgame, even though I'm not mass producing them that much, I do make sure I fit them in, multiple different enclosures where I have sauropods. So this is a pretty good and cost-efficient hadrosaurus, but it's not the best in that department. Since you do get it early on, it's best to create a small herd of them in order to meet the unique species quota, and you basically want to fit them in with other hadrosaurs or iguanodon mixed cages. While I find this a pretty good cost-effective dinosaur, it is held back due to the fact that you really only get it at the 4th star, and by this time you pretty much would have had the unique species requirements, and you're going to be pumping out other dinosaurs instead of worrying about this. If you do want to build them, they do live in small cages with only a handful of things that can really work with them, so I mean, you'd have to kind of go out of your way to make them work, but I mean, just go for any of the previous Ankylosaurs. But I mean, honestly, it's not like a complete waste of money. It's still a cost-effective dinosaur, but and I don't really find too much use for them. So this is a very cost-effective dinosaur, but less so than its other relatives, and it's a bit needier socially. But it's a very solid dinosaur to have at least like the social minimum, or a little bit more to meet that unique species quota. Not really too much else I can say about them. So this is a great early game dinosaur that will fit well as filler with the more social Euplos or the more solitary Ankylos. It's great to have one or a few in parks, and I usually run them for the unique species requirements due to their cost efficiency. So I have a love-hate relationship with this dinosaur. They are superb in terms of value, and they're a great in-game spammer that pairs very well with other sauropods, hence why I love them, but I do despise how obsessed they are with forest, and no matter how many times I put an enclosure with a lot of trees, they always seem to come out upset that there's too little trees. But if you make sure you can keep this need in check, and you can cover this, I mean, they're one of the best dinosaurs overall, and when you run paleobotany with them, they're a great way to rack in that dinosaur rating. So this is a very good value Ankylosaurus. I mean, it's best to put them in a cage by themselves with only a handful of other more solitary dinosaurs. But because it's accessed so early, it's good to just have at least one or a few for the unique species requirement filler, but there's not really too much else you can do with this dinosaur. So this is a very good value hadrosaur, and you pretty much are required to build them since you get them so early in the game. You can spam them out if you want, or for me, I mostly just keep the few around for the unique species requirement. But since they're not as cost effective as some of the other options, I wouldn't recommend them too much for spamming, but I mean, they're definitely a solid choice for having in parks. So this is a cost-effective dinosaur for sure, but due to their low population needs, it is best to create only one and fit them in an enclosure with more solitary Ankylosaurus. They aren't mandatory, and sadly, because you get them kind of late in the game, I even forget to build them. So, if Dilos is the best small carnivore, then Ceratos are the best large carnivores easily. It is a starting animal, so of course you're going to have to use it and have it in your park. And believe it or not, having 3 of them in an enclosure has a higher rating and lower cost than most of the other large carnivores. They are some of the best filler dinosaurs, and you can fit them in with sauropods or smaller carnivores. And I mean, another good perk about them is that they're also the easiest and most tolerable, one of the most easiest and most tolerable carnivores to deal with in terms of storms and such. And they really only need minimum security fences, and they pretty much won't even get upset at all for the whole run. They're definitely a great and always welcome member to my parks, and they've never really let me down. So this is a high value dinosaur, but they're strictly inferior to Ceratos in pretty much every way except for enclosure size. Yes, it does say, if you look at the wetland requirements, that it kind of looks like a lot more, but wetlands can overlap with the forest and grassland, so it's a smaller cage. They need about medium or so fences, or you can modify them to be more docile since they're not as tolerant of storms as, say, like Cerato is. But I pretty much just run them for unique species and not for much else. Fill them in with small carnivores to get more value out of their cages. And another perk about them is since they are fish eaters, and they really don't like going for other feeders as much, they don't compete with the small carnivores for the same food sources. So that means less stress on the small carnivores and less welfare penalties, and just generally healthier, happier dinosaurs. Sadly, this highly rated sauropod is held back by 2 things. By the time you acquire it, you're more than likely have already start spamming the other sauropods out. I mean, and while it is a pretty good value dinosaur, it's one of the more difficult sauropods to manage and take care of because they require such a ridiculous size enclosure to be happy. And because of these 2 things, I would not recommend them, but, I would be lying if I said I did not regret not using them because, they are cool and I do want to use them. So this is a decent dinosaur in terms of cost efficiency, but since it's a start dinosaur, you are pretty much forced to run them. I mean, to be fair, they aren't terribly bad, so it's not like a huge burden that you have to build like other species that you start off with. But you can use them as the primary or the cage filler Stegosaurus and mixed Stegosaurus enclosure. And realistically, I just throw them in with Chungchingasauruses and call it a day. So these are not the most cost-efficient sauropod around, but because you get these so early and they mesh so well with other things as fillers, you pretty much are going to spam these out towards the end game. I mean, but they're majestic and one of my favorite dinosaurs in JPOG, so I don't really mind running these guys in my parks. Paleobotany added to them really makes them, it's just amazing. So, they're good dinosaurs. This dinosaur is pretty much a much needier, less cost-efficient dilo. There's nothing terribly wrong with it. I mean, it's a serviceable dinosaur, but dilos are vastly superior to it in almost every way. And because you get it early on, I mean, you can use them as filler dinosaurs for the unique species quota, but outside of that, I really don't use them because for some strange reason, the helicopters always have extreme trouble, like, tranquilizing them if they get out or if I need to transport them. So, you know, instead of dealing with that hassle, I'll just go with something else. So, anyone who's seen my most recent challenge mode tips guide can tell you that I'm obsessed with this dinosaur. It is a great early game dinosaur that fits well in hadrosaurs and with its iguanodon cousin. While it's not as cost effective as some of the hadrosaurs and stuff like that, a maxed out herd of iguanodons and these guys with the paleobotany bonuses will create a highly rated enclosure. A pretty good candidate if you don't want to spam hadrosaurs for late game, in my mind, and in my biased opinion, I would say. So this is an average cost-efficient dinosaur, but it makes up in a variety of other ways. It is the most resilient small carnivore to adverse weather conditions, meaning you can use minimum security fences and not have to worry about them breaking out. They're a pretty good pair with Ceratos because since they both are very low on, I guess, like irritability, like you just really can store them in low fence cages. But with these guys, with Herreras, they can live solo or in small groups of its kind, and they're pretty good filler dinosaurs with, again, carnivores or even with sauropods. While other small carnivores may be better fillers and more cost effective, it does not hurt to build a handful of Herreras because of the unique species requirement. But due to this dinosaur's max social limit, its pretty high rating, and its high population limit, any other carnivore that you could possibly build in your park that comes after it on this tier list is obsolete and strictly an inferior choice compared to this dinosaur right here. So because you get these guys so early on, they're pretty much good for the unique species quota, but really only build a couple of these and save space for the other ceratopsids. They're not the most cost-effective dinosaurs, but they're functional and serviceable, so, I mean, having a few around won't hurt. So, this is a highly rated sauropod, and it has a very low environment requirements, which on paper would seem like a very good deal. However, it's held back by the fact that it's a hybrid research dinosaur, meaning you need to complete a genome of other species to even start its research. And with it being part Ankylosaurus, it doesn't really like to be around a lot of other dinosaurs, unlike most of the other sauropods who could deal in massive herds. But, I mean, because of this, it's just kind of better to sit with the other natural-born sauropods. So despite this dinosaur's low rating and average cost efficiency, because it's a starting dinosaur, you're kind of forced to use it since it's one of the few dinosaurs you have access to. Only build one or a few. I mean, they will more likely to not die before the run's over, so, I mean, you can replace them with other ceratopsids, but it doesn't hurt to have at least one around if you feel your unique species quota will drop. It's a shame, because in JPOG, this animal was revered as one of the most highly rated dinosaurs you could have had in your park. So, this is unlocked too late in the game, it's too needy, and it's not the best value for a hadrosaur. Just go for any other earlier hadrosaurs before this, and you pretty much will be fine. So this is a less cost-efficient, more needy, and comparatively as irritable Velociraptor alternative. No thank you, not for me, no, not at all. I mean, sure, they're unlocked pretty early in the game, but you can pretty much make just about any other early game carnivore and get a significantly better mileage out of them versus this low-rate Velociraptor wannabe. Since you unlock these guys early on, they are not the most cost-efficient option, but you pretty much need to build only a handful to meet the unique species quota, and you just want to fit them in maxed Hadrosaurus cage. Not really too much else I can say on them. Okay, while this is a very expensive dinosaur to field, it has many perks that may make it worth the cost for you. First off, it's unlocked so early in the game that it's a good initial unique species quota dinosaur. Secondly, it can live by itself, meaning you can use it to test the sizes of developing cages that you have in mind. And you can also put it in large groups of hadrosaurs and Tyrannosauruses. And Thirdly, it can fight back against small and medium-sized carnivores. So with modifications or ranger team assistance, you basically can, improve the rating through that. I mean, as long as you don't have killable friends in there that you want to have to remake. But yeah, this is definitely a good way to retire old age carnivores and, improve the rating itself. Lastly, when paired with Ouranosaurus and Paleobotany, a full enclosure of 10 of Iguanodons and 10 Ouranosauruses will provide you a combined rating, assuming no Iguanodons have killed anything, of over 1,200. This is one of the highest cage ratings possible outside of using sauropods or carnivores. As a result, despite being a bit costly, I use these guys as an in-game spammer along with sauropods, since they can trickle in a bit more rapidly than the sauropods. This is unlocked a bit late in the game, and you probably would have filled your Stegosaurus cage with any of the earlier relatives. It's also extremely needy of friends, which is another issue I have with this animal. However, I mean, you can use the ones given to you on Sorna, as they're a great help in the early economy. Just make sure to sell them or kill them off with predators once they start dropping out from old age, because once they go underneath the social requirement, they're just inconsolable. I wish I could love Littlefoot over here, but he has a fair share of glaring issues in this game. It's not the most cost-efficient sauropod, and there's definitely better options out of them, but because you get it so late game and it's just so socially needy, I just run every other sauropod that I get before it and just really don't touch it. So I'm not a huge fan of this dinosaur in the slightest. I mean, I think it's pretty ugly, and if I saw this in real life, I probably would run away. Besides, it's unlocked pretty late in the game. It's a research dinosaur that requires the genome to be complete of stegos, but that's a 4-star animal. I mean, that's just so late. You pretty much would just better spend that money on, I don't know, funding any other dinosaur, and it's just a waste of time, honestly. Just go for something else, please. I would not recommend these dinosaurs if it were not for the fact that they are basically given to you at the start of the park or near the start. They are not cost effective at all, but compared to some of the other stegosaurs, they aren't the worst. I mean, I put them in with my Huangasauruses, and either this is the primary stegosaurus in the enclosure or the Huangasauruses are the primary stegosaurs, but I only really use one cage of them and don't really do much else with them. So, sadly, this is a very bad Ceratopsid in challenge mode. It's not very cost effective. It's unlocked so late in the game, and it can only live in small populations. Any possible role you may find with this dinosaur, just go with the Chasmosaurus. It'll just serve you better in every single way possible. I'm not very sure why this dinosaur is so cost inefficient. I mean, Archaeo is just better than it in every possible way except for max population size, but just barely even in that. But since it's available so early on, I mean, you can use it for the unique species bonus by slapping it in with your other Struthies and Archaeos, but really outside of this, despite this being a staple dinosaur of the series, it's pretty bad. While this is definitely on the expensive side, there are easily better alternatives. But I am personally biased with these dinosaurs and always run them. While they aren't cheap, they make up for it by being very resilient large carnivores to stress-induced storms. So you place them in a park with minimum security. As long as they're happy from the get-go, they won't become problematic for the entire one, pretty much. You can fit some small carnivores in there. Or, if you want, you can throw them into some sauropod cages. I mean, they're pretty versatile where you can put them. So, this is one of the most cost-inefficient stegosaurs, and while I primarily run Huangasauruses and Chungchingosaurs by themselves, I sometimes occasionally fit these in late games, but I mean, I only really do so if the previous dinosaurs have died of old age and there's just room to spare for these guys. But outside of that, I won't really make room to put them in. So this thing's a tree hugger. I mean, this thing needs so much forest. And despite its high rating, I would not recommend it due to its cost ineffectiveness and its inclination to rampage over the slightest inconvenience, like its bigger cousin. I'd never used these things in this game or JPOG, so I don't really have much attachment or incentive to make use of them. Only build and keep a couple of these in a Ceratopsid exclusive enclosure. They're only used for padding out the unique species quota mid-game, and they really have no other significant functions outside of that due to how costly they are. While these guys are costly, I wouldn't recommend using them if you're strictly trying to be money efficient. I personally do use them a lot, as they're very manageable, calm, and versatile for a carnivore. And, it's just nice to look at, so that's pretty much why I use them, even though they're not the best. Only build and keep one or a couple of these in a Hadrosaur or Struthiomimus enclosure, and you really only use these for padding for the unique species quota at the start of the game, since you are low on dino options at the start. They have no other significant functions outside of this, but they're versatile and extraordinarily easy to manage, as they can live in solo or in large groups. Only build and keep a couple of these in a Ceratopsid exclusive enclosure, only really used for padding the unique species quota early and mid-game. They have no other significant function outside of that due to how costly they are. I fail to see the uses of this animal. It is cost inefficient, needy, and unlocked so late in the game that I don't even bother using it. I mean, if you're a fan of Stegosaurus as a whole, you can fit these guys in other Stegosaurus inclusives, and they'll live happily with them as long as you meet the minimum social requirement, that is, and that's a pretty hefty thing to meet. If you absolutely want to have a massively large theropod dinosaur in your park, and you don't want to use something objectively better like the earlier carnivores, remember Herrerasaurus? This one is the best and least demanding of space, but this is not saying much at all because it's still very, very much cost efficient and it's easily angered. They can be useful in-game, but I really wouldn't recommend it. So, I only make this dinosaur out to pad out the rating towards the end, and they make a pretty good companion for sauropods. However, this does not change the fact that they're extraordinarily demanding for a large carnivore in all areas, and I wouldn't recommend them overall unless you really had a thing for them. But, I build them because JPOG loyalty and all, and that's why I even bother to begin with. So, this is my favorite dinosaur. It was my mascot in JPOG, and I refuse to make a park without having these guys. It pains me to say that they are horrendously cost inefficient, and they are strictly inferior to Giga in almost every way except for total population limit. Avoid using. Back when I was a kid, I would reset Operation Genesis mode in JPOG over and over again until my stunning dinosaur was this bad boy. I loved this thing to pieces back then. Too bad it is too costly and too temperamental to be of much use in this game. But I'm happy to see it come to this game, more or less. I wouldn't recommend this dinosaur due to it not being cost effective and you receive it so late in the game. But it's the highest rated non-hybrid dinosaur, so it could be an option to push out at the end to make the 5-star park. Outside of the cost and time required, it looks cool. I mean, it can live in pairs, and it's not as fussy as a lot of the other large carnivores. You can exploit the free one that's given to you on Sorna. It prints money in the early and mid game. You can pair it with small carnivores, and same thing with the Baryonyx. Because this guy can feed from fish feeders, it won't really compete that much with the small carnivores for food. So, I know this guy is supposed to be like the major mascot of the game and the entire Jurassic Park, Jurassic World series, but it's an absolute joke in challenge mode. And despite receiving it early on, it's just best to avoid using them entirely. They're too cost inefficient, they get angry too easily, and they can only live by themselves unless you genetically modify them to make them more tolerable of other members of its species. Any other carnivore that comes before it is just a better deal. The only time you ever see me use a T-Rex would be on Sorna when I killed off the resident Spino. Mind you, this is not because the Spino did me any wrong. It was a marvelous and useful animal. I only did it because it was nearing its deathbed, and I didn't want to see my ratings plummet when it died. And unlike that previous Spino, I had to constantly put this Rex to sleep in order to prevent it from rampaging once it stormed. I only kept it around because it has such a high rating from the modifications I gave it, and because, you know, that Spino partially lived on through it when it got killed. In the ratings, at least. So, this is one of the most costly dinosaurs to create in your parks, but I have a soft spot for them since they're pretty easy to manage. They fit well with small carnivores, and we get the mid-game. Since they like eating fish, they don't really compete with other small carnivores for the same resources that much. And I wouldn't recommend building them unless you're a fan of them and have money to spare, really. These guys are held back due to their high price tags, being unlocked so late in the game, and needing to have completed the genome of Velociraptor and Spinosauruses. And they need to have at least another member of their species to be happy. Hence why you should avoid using them. However, they have a decent temperament compared to like other raptors, and you can fit them in with sauropods and other small carnivores if you want to go the route to getting them, which I wouldn't suggest doing though, but... So, why even bother with this guy? This thing's a menace to all things except for small packs of carnivores you could keep around it. And it's constantly in the I must kill everything around me mode, so... And it's just expensive to make. It requires the completed genome of T-Rexes and Velociraptors, which is two dinosaurs that you almost never see me use. And you pretty much just go with anything else that comes before it. Even the ones that I wouldn't recommend, I would recommend them over this guy. So, this is an absolute garbage dinosaur in almost every way. It's not cost-effective at all. You get it so late in the game, and you only do it through research. The only saving grace about it has a pretty decent temperament, but by that point, you have so many other options that you could invest in that it's a waste of time to go for this guy. So, it's hard to list all of the issues with this guy, but here goes. You get absolutely no value out of this dinosaur with this ridiculous price tag. It is one of the last dinosaurs you can possibly unlock, as you need 4 stars. You need to have the Indominus Rex genome researched, which in itself requires T-Rex and Velociraptor have researched. And it can practically live with no other species without killing them. And it's angered easily. I mean, realistically, you just forget about this dinosaur and just go about your business winning the mode. Because, I do find it funny how the most cost-effective dinosaur has the lowest rating, but the highest rating dinosaur has the least cost efficiency. It's kind of funny like that, but hey, is what it is. But anyway, hope you liked the video. Like, share, subscribe. If you have any further questions on a dinosaur, please feel free to ask in the comments. And if there's anything I missed or would like to you'd like to address that's wrong, just feel free to mention that. But again, if any other dinosaurs come out, I'm going to be doing this all over again. So yeah, anyway, peace.